Welcome to Both Sides, a podcast between a film industry insider and an outsider to get their unique perspectives on movies. I'm your host, Andrew Heilman. I'm the owner of a production company, a camera operator, editor, and film student. Today, my guest is my brother, Washington, and we'll be watching Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey. Stay tuned till the end to hear our final reviews of the film. In case you need a refresher or you've never seen it, here's the story in a nutshell. The Odyssey tells the story of Odysseus' long and perilous journey home after the Trojan War, as he overcomes mythical dangers, outwits powerful enemies, and fights to reunite with his wife, Penelope, and reclaim his kingdom. Now, let's talk about this movie. I think we're gone.
The movie just ended.
Sitting through the credits right now.
Yeah, they just happened and everybody's walking out.
All right, we're through the gates.
Wow, I'd like to...
Yeah, well, leaving right now. Put in the trash in the trash can.
12:30.
Yep, it's about 12:30 a.m. We're in the lobby. Walking out the doors. Oh, I think they're grabbing posters. We should probably get one of those. So for context, we're here at the IMAX theater, the Esquire Theater in Sacramento. We drove about 2 hours north from San Jose to get here.
We were really on the second floor. We were in the projector booth.
Specifically to get opening night tickets in the 1570 IMAX film format, as opposed to watching it on a digital projector.
It just hit me that the reason why the movie wasn't in like 16:9 was that it was in resolution of the actual film reels.
Yes, and it was the aspect ratio that it was shot in was specifically, I think it's 4:5 or something.
Yeah.
And that's the IMAX.
For a second, I was like, why am I
Aspect
watching
ratio.
this movie in 4:5?
Where are you going?
Wow.
So, what did you think coming from someone who hasn't read the book and
had no idea what the movie
was about?
I did read the synopsis on our way to the theater, which I'm very happy I did, because then I wouldn't have any idea what's going on. Biggest flaw is that Matt Damon shouldn't have been in the movie. He shouldn't have been Odysseus.
Why? What's wrong with him being Odysseus?
You're marketing this movie as a Chris Nolan movie. It's going to be popular. I wanted someone's breakout role being Odysseus. All the other actors were fine being like household names. I feel like it should have been someone new for Odysseus. It shouldn't have been Matt Damon for the lead part.
Well, you got to recognize that that's a very risky move.
It's a Chris Nolan movie. It's going to do well.
Yeah, but it's a really risky move long term to put an unknown actor in that big of a position starring a movie, unless they've got some sort of crazy talent behind them, because this movie was already going to be extremely popular for the technical aspect of it, as opposed to it being extremely
shot on IMAX, right?
Yeah, but that's like the main reason why people are going to go and see this movie. No one cares
I feel like
about
film nerds. That's going to be the only reason film nerds see the movie is because it's completely shot on IMAX. People aren't going to care about that. No.
I mean, they're going to care about it a lot more than they would normally care about it. Yeah. So your main gripe with it is that you don't think Matt Damon should have had that role, and that it should have been.
It shouldn't have been Matt Damon. It should have been someone new.
Yeah. I mean, I think Matt Damon.
But can you see the logic from where I'm coming is?
I understand what you're saying, but for this big of a movie, I think I'd rather have a veteran actor who's really good at it.
Comprehending the size of the movie well enough?
No, you're comprehending it fine. I understand the justification of wanting a newer person to be the lead actor, because no matter what, it's going to make a movie.
It would have been that big. It would have been even bigger for the breakout role. They would have been secured for life in Hollywood.
Yeah, but then again, I think I'd rather see for 3 hours. If they're going to put that much of an emphasis on that particular character, that having it be a veteran actor that's fun to watch, that knows the character well and knows how to act, is very beneficial. So I ended up reading the book. I haven't reread it in quite a while.
When did you first read it?
I read it like 6 or 7 months ago. I read it in preparation for the movie.
Okay.
And I remember it being pretty good. I liked the story quite a bit. One of the things that I wished would have been handled a little differently in Nolan's movie is there was more of an emphasis put on with Odysseus and the war. I don't think that they even showcased, they mentioned the war in Troy, but they didn't talk about like the Trojan horse or any of that kind of stuff in the original story. And they hopped back and forth in the story between Odysseus and Tom Holland's character, Telemachus, and Penelope and that whole situation. Versus in the movie, they focus much more on Matt Damon and his story and his trek home. This is actually one of those cases where I think it could have been 40 minutes longer, and I think it would have held up a lot better as a great adaptation of the story. Adaptation. Like a more fulfilling adaptation, because in the book, one of the reasons that makes the book so interesting is because the problem statement of the Odyssey story is that they have their king leaves to fight a war and he doesn't come back. He's presumed dead, but they can't confirm that he's dead. Yeah. And because they can't confirm that he's dead, the suitors and all of the people of the kingdom can't basically go up to the queen and become the new king that they need, because they could do that if it was confirmed that he was dead, but because they can't confirm that he's not dead, they can't take Tom Holland's character's place as king. So that's the whole tension. So for 20 years, they don't know where their king is, so they can't replace him. And then finally they get fed up and they just start to plot the destruction of the kingdom by getting rid of Telemachus and replacing him and becoming him as king. And I like that drama dynamic a lot more than I liked the action and the...
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, I just like that kind of stuff better. I think it's more unique. And I think it would have made...
I guess action can be a little repetitive sometimes.
I think Nolan did an incredible job in Oppenheimer with making the villains not seem quite like villains.
I was also going to say a compliment for the movie was that I understood this movie a lot more than Oppenheimer, because Oppenheimer, when I first watched Oppenheimer after the bomb went off, I pretty much lost all my interest, because it was all about politics, which I wasn't taking in, and it was all, not to talk about Oppenheimer, but it was about whether or not he was a communist, and I kind of just lost. I think my attention span started to go down after the bomb went off, but that didn't happen with this movie.
I think the villains in Oppenheimer were much more well-rounded and complicated and dynamic than they were in this movie, because we lacked the time to develop the villains' motives behind what they did. Because in the book, they elaborate on, look, you literally don't have a king for your kingdom for 20 years. What does that mean? That means, you can't protect your city. That means, you can't develop it. You can't, whatever. There's so many of these political blockers, and you need a king to run your country. So it's not a purely evil, malicious thing to try to, become king and try to, suit the wife. But I think those guys were villainized very strictly, whereas if I was telling the story, I would want to develop those characters a little bit more. And even if it's not exactly how the book goes, and the book villainizes them a lot more strictly, I mean, this movie decides to take creative liberties in other ways and not stay completely strict to the book. So it's like, it's the age-old question of if you're adapting a story,
do you do it word for word?
Do you have the right to alter it and improve it if there's no such thing as a perfect story? So people talk about this in Jurassic Park and Jaws and stuff. Like, Spielberg takes these stories that he's adapting and he cuts out all the fat and trims and alters the personalities of a lot of the characters, like John Hammond, and he removed marital tension between a few of the characters in Jaws because he felt like it wasn't necessary to the story. Like, can you do that if you're adapting something and make it more interesting? So whereas Oppenheimer is much more of a deep, dynamic, complicated characters, complicated heroes, complicated villains, this movie is the Odyssey is a much more straightforward story, and that's probably going to be why most audiences like it more. Well, it's told not in a chronological order.
I was gonna compliment the way the story was built, where the movie starts off with Odysseus and
the movie is just very
with the lotus leaves. It starts out with him having no memory, and then he slowly learns what's going on, and then halfway through the movie, then he heads back home after we know everything.
Well, that's just
I thought that was better than the movie starting off with him going to war, then.
That's the strong suit.
Crashes his ship and then loses his memory.
That's the strong suit of all Nolan films, is that they're not told in chronological order, and they're told interestingly in the way that they're structured. But my point is, the Odyssey is much more action-packed and much more straightforward. You know exactly who the good guy is, who the bad guy is, where to stand. It doesn't make you question anything. It doesn't really challenge you as much as Oppenheimer did. That's why I loved Oppenheimer. I thought Oppenheimer was state-of-the-art in drama storytelling and, vagueness and unsuredness and not knowing where you stand with things. And I thought that Oppenheimer was much more of a complicated movie, and I wanted that out of this story, how the original story is. To me, the original story is much more complicated and much more deep than the straightforward version that Nolan gave us. But, that being said, we watched, probably the most technologically advanced film ever made so far, in terms of being shot on a film format that is, the most complicated, whatever. And it looked amazing. One thing that I will say is, if you guys have...
It looked very good.
Yeah, it looked great. But if you're gonna watch it projected in IMAX in 70 millimeter, beware if you guys have epilepsy, because...
the actual film scrolling through the projector caused the bright shots and the bright moments to flicker a little bit.
Getting in the car now.
We just got out of the theater. We just walked up 6 parking lot squares since the elevator was closed off. We walked up 6 flights of stairs. We're getting into the car. We made it out of the theater. Into the car.
Time to drive another 2 hours back or whatever.
Worth it.
But
you were saying?
Yeah, but I was saying that as someone who really likes Nolan for his ability to make really deep characters.
How many Nolan films have you seen?
Memento, all Batmans.
Okay.
I haven't seen Dunkirk. Saw Oppenheimer. Haven't seen Tenet. I should probably see that at one point. But I really wanted a more deep story from a personal dramatic level between the characters, and the movie stressed much more on making a certain point. The most deep, most interesting interpersonal thing that happened in that movie was probably the emotions behind the Trojan War coming from Matt Damon's character Odysseus.
I thought it was very emotional and stuff, seeing all of his men get killed off. That was pretty cool. I thought there were some points in the movie where...
But his character development about, regretting the war and seeing all that kind of stuff is the most interesting, emotional thing that happens in that movie. I know in the original book, it stressed a lot more on the interactions between the gods and the goddesses, especially Athena, and the role that they played in the story. Versus the movie did talk about the gods a lot, but Zendaya's character Athena didn't feel as important. I know that in the book, I believe, Odysseus, in order to get back to Ithaca, I think he has an interaction with Athena, and Athena casts a spell over him or whatever that makes everyone think that he's someone else. Which makes a lot more sense than him being able to stroll in and just have a hood on and no one being able to understand him or recognize his voice, even his own wife. I get that it's been 20 years, but even still, that breaks an illusion barrier to me. I think it would have been much more interesting if they played more into the fantastical side of that story and the mythos of that story.
I thought that was really cool when he came back and he was like, oh, nobody knows him.
Yeah, I thought it was cool, but the movie can't decide if it wants to be a mythos and mythological story that's... sometimes it wants to be super fantastical and go over, all the gods and stuff, but it doesn't go in too deep like the book does. The book elaborates way more on the gods and their involvement in the story and what they actually do. And the movie makes it a much more rooted in reality story on the surface, but then it tries to me it just feels a little wrong, the way that they went about doing it, just because it's such a complicated story. After hours, exit right. Can I exit? Okay. I'm trying to exit this parking garage and they closed a gate on me.
Yeah, we got right up to the gate and it was like, oh, it's closed. Hopefully they'll let us out. Okay, we just got out. Okay, cool. Okay, we're free. Okay, we're free. We got out of the theater into...
Give me directions to home.
Is that an alarm from us?
No.
Getting directions to home.
No. Okay, so the alarm was a false alarm.
The crowd was a lot quieter than I thought they would be.
There were some points where they cheered.
Yeah, there was one specific moment where, at the very end, where Odysseus comes
where
into
he shoots the arrow through the axe heads.
Yeah, and he does his first reveal to everyone that he's Odysseus, and he shoots one of the guys in the throat with the arrow.
And the initial battle begins in the castle. That's when the crowd really started to act like they were watching a WWE cage match, and everyone was cheering for the victor wrestler.
Yeah, so I thought that we would get a Force Awakens crowd because I know that the hype is pretty crazy and it was opening night, but I guess it was just really late or something because no one really cheered.
We had one cosplayer as a Roman soldier, which was cool.
Yeah. But, I mean, it was great. They really stressed a lot on Odysseus' path home, and I feel like Telemachus was a really underused character. And they could have developed that side of the story a lot more.
It is the Odyssey. It is about his path home.
Yeah, but it's also a lot about, because his path home and his reason for coming home isn't that important if they don't make the stakes and the understanding of the political system of Ithaca. His trip home doesn't have as much value if you don't develop the reason why he's coming home. And the reason why he's coming home is because he needs to reunite with his family, become king so that his wife doesn't get taken over by the suitors and that his son doesn't get killed and all that kind of stuff. They developed it enough to understand what was going on in the story, but I didn't think that they made it as dynamic as they could with showing more humanity in the suitors and all that kind of stuff. Even if the book doesn't necessarily do that and villainizes them, I think it would have been a more interesting story if we could shadow Robert Pattinson's character for a little bit and see what his life looked like.
I did think Robert Pattinson should have had a little bit more screen time.
Just like him, like his group, like some of the suitors, instead of being so focused on Odysseus the whole time, because I don't see the story as just a story about Odysseus. I see it as like the Greek mythos, like a all-encompassing story about all of that in those characters. And again, like seeing a movie projected, like I could see the little white blips and the little scratches in the film.
Yeah, it kind of looked like, you know how when it's a sunny day and you're just looking at a view and you see all like little artifacts like in your eyes, you see little bits and pieces floating around like in your eyes. It looked like that.
Yes, it did.
On the film.
I'm trying to figure out how to get home. I've never been to Sacramento before. Shout out Sacramento. So I think, is it here?
Sacramento.
It takes 5 South. Okay.
Anybody who has ever been on 5 South before, now you know that we were once on the 5 South, so.
Now, granted, I'm a little sleepy and a little discombobulated, and my points might not make a whole lot of sense or be invalid, but that's just mainly because I drove like 3 hours to get here. It's a little past midnight, and we got another 2 hours to drive back home. And that doesn't sound really late, but to me that's pretty late, waking up at like 4 in the morning every morning to go to work and stuff.
You wake up at 4?
But yeah, sometimes.
What time are you going to bed?
I don't know. I've got to upload this video and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, well, it's still piping hot and fresh. All
Yeah.
the reviews are coming out.
All the reviews are coming out. But main consensus from me, thought it was a good movie. I thought it was a pretty faithful adaptation. Of course, there's no such thing as a perfect story, and there are a lot of Chris Nolan decisions that he makes that I personally don't like. A lot of his editing style is not my favorite, especially with coverage where he likes to jump from certain coverages. Like he'll have two close-ups of two people in a conversation, one of them drinking a cup of water or whatever. They'll be gesturing something, and then normally you'd cut to a wide shot to like end the scene. But he for some reason they like to like cut to the wide shot to end the scene farther in the conversation than they are in the close-ups. Like they'll be lifting a piece of, like, for instance, they'll be taking a hat. This isn't exactly what happened in the movie, but this is just a little nitpick. They'll be like taking a hat off their head or something, and then they'll cut to a wide shot, and the wide shot, the hat is on their lap or something. Now, they do that because it saves time, because no one wants to watch someone do the full movement of taking their hat off, because it just adds time. But to me, it kind of feels like you're in a weird daydream sequence where nothing has any worth or value, and it feels like, you know, the rules of reality don't really make sense. So I don't like when he does that. There's a lot of decisions that he likes to make with the coverage that I don't really like. It kind of pulls me out of the story. The biggest thing that people are going to probably have a problem with is the way that they talk, because they use modern day, like, American English accents for...
I thought it was more palatable, personally.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with it, especially since I got the justification of why they did that, which is basically that the traditional way that you tell that kind of story is you give them like a fake Roman accent that's based on British, that sounds very high society or whatever. That's how they did in like Ben-Hur 59 and Spartacus and all these, you know, kind of stories. But that's not really how the Greeks and the Romans talked, and it doesn't make it any less fake. So why not go all out and make something more palatable with an American English accent if no matter what you do, whatever you try to emulate their accent, it's always going to sound off and not right, because we don't know how Greeks talked, 7,000, 8,000, 10,000 years ago. Because, you know, we know that they spoke Greek, obviously, but languages and the accents of the languages change over time.
Old English does not sound like New English at all. It's Old Greek.
Yeah, so like American English today doesn't sound like anything American, like George Washington spoke, for instance.
Well,
and we know somewhat of how George Washington spoke, not exactly. Same thing with Abraham Lincoln, all these characters.
It's kind of different with them since we have their text and writing. I'm not trying to nitpick, but...
Yeah, but again, we don't know. We never heard what they sounded like, so... You know, Daniel Day-Lewis's portrayal of Lincoln and of Abraham Lincoln in the Lincoln film is, you know, anyone's best guess to what he actually sounded
Imagine
like.
if Abraham Lincoln sounded like an anime girl. People would have commented on that in 1865, but what if everyone spoke like anime girls?
But yeah, I mean, I'm being kind of harsh, mainly because I had a lot of high hopes for this movie that the movie did deliver on, and I probably have to rewatch it a few times before I get my full concrete opinion. That's just kind of like my overview of the story and what I thought of it. Did you have any?
Yeah, I was gonna offer my
offer your consensus of the movie.
Cool. My consensus was that the arc of the movie was very good. I like the arc of the movie, where the movie starts off with Matt Damon, no memory. It was kind of like a mix between The Revenant and The Count of Monte Cristo. But not really. It's its own separate thing. But those were the vibes.
Stranded like in Count of Monte Cristo.
Yeah, those were the vibes I initially got. I like the arc and the story and the way everything was set up. Don't think Matt Damon should have been lead actor. I think it should have been a newbie, so they could have had a fit, secure career in Hollywood. I feel like 1,000 people who are new to acting, or not new to acting, but new to Hollywood, could have done the same job as Matt Damon, if not better. But I thought that was good. I thought that the acting was fine. The dialogue was fine. I did get a little lost in the sauce at some points, only because when watching movies like these, where it's so much deeper than an average movie, there's a lot more meat to chew on, to sink your teeth into. I do tend to get lost in what's going on at some points, but whenever I did get lost in like what was going on with the story, they did a pretty good job with putting me back on track, which I appreciated, and that's pretty much all I have to say. I don't really have any other comments to make.
Yeah, I was going to make like a few other ones, specifically with the format that we chose to watch it in, or I chose for us to watch in. We chose to watch in 70mm film, projected on IMAX, and there's something magical about it, but beware, the flicker is real. There's especially in the highlights and the brighter
I feel like by the time I got halfway through, the film, I got kind of used to it. But the flicker of the film, that's real. That's the real aspect to it. That's the film sliding across.
But this is a review, so I'm trying to like bring up some of the things that could be problematic. There was that. There was the specific sequence where I think it was Zeus's like retaliation on them at one point in the boat on the water. It was super dark, and then they would have flashing.
I thought that was
thunder.
actually really cool.
I thought it was cool. It's probably my favorite sequence of the movie.
I felt it. I felt the thunder. Every time the thunder happened, I was like, whoa!
Yeah, no problem with the sound design of the movie. I thought the sound design was great. But it definitely gave me like a headache at one point, because it was just hard to really understand, to have my brain process everything that was going on with all the data and, the bright flashes and all that. So that kind of gave me a headache. But then again, I'm kind of old, so.
Yeah.
But I will say, watching the movie in IMAX on that big of a screen, I wanted to mention the focus pulling, because that movie is like half out of focus, and it really bothers me.
I did see that some shots they were talking between two people, and the camera would focus on whoever's talking, but there would be a delay on when they would focus. I did see that.
Well, there was that, but then there was actually some sequences where they were not fully in focus. Now, I understand that someone being out of focus is much more noticeable on a giant screen.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of coming to the conclusion that for these larger formats, the best way to view them is like on a smartphone, because you're compressing the giant image to a really, really small display, and it'll never look better than if it was on a very, very small display. And things that look out of focus will look in focus, and you'll have all the data, and it'll be much more clearer, because when we watched it on the blown up to a giant screen, even though the resolution is the equivalent of like 20K or whatever, you definitely don't feel, I didn't feel as much detail and everything, especially since it was all shot on like F3, and there was a giant shallow depth of field that made everything not as detailed. It made it all feel kind of blurry and boring to me. Yeah. Versus if it were shot in deep focus, much more things would be in focus, and you could see much more things. I'm assuming that they did that because that camera probably needs a lot of light. And if you shoot with a shallow depth of field...
Oh, it does need a lot of light, yeah.
If you shoot in a shallow depth of field, more light gets through the sensor because you're exposing the negative to more light via the aperture. But when you do that, it creates a giant shallow depth of field, and then you need to put NDs and all that kind of stuff on it. But if they would have shot it, seeing it in IMAX on a giant screen would have felt so much more special if everything wasn't so shallow, and if the focus was nailed on. So just be cautious if you're going to watch this movie in film, in IMAX. there's going to be some things that are a little off. Like focus is going to be a little off. The detail that you see is going to be a little off, just because that's the nature of the film. But, you know, to give it credit, you are seeing a human work of art when you see those kind of human errors. It's kind of what differentiates it from...
They're not even human errors, they're artifacts.
Well, they're artifacts and human errors. They're kind of both. It's a plethora of things.
Okay.
But the good thing about it is it separates it from something like AI or computer generated.
Yeah, I cringed at myself a couple times seeing some of the shots, and I've seen like so much AI generated videos on the internet over the times. There were some shots in the movie where I was like, this kind of looks like AI, but I was like, stupid, you dunce. Why would you think that this art piece is AI, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it just makes the movie more important if it's got those little human errors in it.
100%.
Instead of something it differentiates it from being AI and all sorts of stuff. So it bothered me a lot because I am a filmmaker that cares about those things, and I just have to bring attention to it as a part of a review to mention it. We're pulling up to the gas station right now.
Yeah.
So
another thing I gotta point out, and I had to look up the name of this character and actor in the movie. Yuri Locus, played by Himesh Patel. He was Odysseus's like secondhand man on the big boat. There were a couple scenes in the movie where they just could have killed him off like immediately, and I know he died later on by eating the cows, but they could have killed him off earlier, and I think it would have been like more emotionally wrenching, because there were some points in the movie where I was like, oh shoot, is he gonna die? No. But then he didn't die, and I was like, oh, that's kind of meh. But then he did die, and I was like, oh yeah, he died. They actually killed off one of the bigger characters, which I thought was cool.
Yeah, I thought that was cool and well done. I thought they played Odysseus' character very well. Just faithfully to the book, that's pretty much how he was. He was kind of just a pretty cool guy who beat everyone. They killed him off.
He definitely didn't earn his, he definitely did earn his victory.
Yeah, but they put so much of a stress on the war in Troy that it doesn't, in the book they hardly even mentioned it in that amount of detail, that, you know, they spent a lot more time, and granted, no one wants to watch Matt Damon stranded on an island for 20 minutes, but it gave so much more depth to the experience of being stranded and Calypso's manipulation and her seducing him. They didn't develop her character hardly at all. So, I mean, it's one of those movies that needs to be like 40 minutes longer to really give all of the characters all of the time that they deserve because of how interesting they are. But I understand why they'd want to cater it, condense it, cater it to an American audience by giving them American accents and all sorts of stuff. I'm going to add gas real quick. I'm away from Washington now, adding gas.
He's away from me right now, getting gas. He has no idea what I'm saying right
this, now. Insert, press for debit. I could say that the movie
was butt cheeks, and he'd have no clue as to what I'm saying right now.
Yeah, my main contention with the characters is that basically, I feel like Matt Damon's character Odysseus is the only one that got real depth and dynamicism, which is not what I thought was going to happen. I thought that each character would get a lot more time to experiment with how they handled situations and, you know, the decisions they made and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, I get it. They'd want to simplify the story, and basically the idea was just to modernize it and to make it more palatable, which it did. But it definitely takes away from, in my opinion, the impact that the original story had on me. But I understand, you know, the decisions that they made. I just would have done it differently, which is fine. You know, I happen to be a very sentimental kind of, you know, hyper realism / romanticized realism when it comes to storytelling. So I basically with every movie I watch, I reevaluate what I like and what makes my movies different and what I try to do. And it's the only, in a medium as controversial and, subjective as it is, there's a million different ways to do film, and you can only really find your way, and your way's going to be different from other ways, and it's always going to, rub you off a little different when you see someone make a decision and then you question it and be like, oh, I wonder why they did that. I don't think it serves the story better than this way that I would have done it. But with all that being said, the movie has been at least a smash hit with critics so far. The problem with watching these things opening night is that you don't really get a audience consensus. So normally in our final review, I go over the critics and then the audience's scores. So the critic score right now on Rotten Tomatoes, which is the biggest platform for movie reviews in the world, is right now the critic consensus is that it's a 96% out of 100, which sounds very film buff-y to me. It sounds like they really enjoyed it because they either like Chris Nolan or they like what he's trying to do with shooting on film on IMAX as more of like a pioneer than whether or not the movie's actually that score to me. As an adaptation, I think that it could have been a little different, and I would have raised my score up from that. But what would you give your score of the movie from your personal experience and what you took away from it?
I liked it quite much, and I didn't really have any problems with it that I can think of. It was very unproblematic. If I had to give it a score from 1 to 100, I'd probably give it probably a solid 90. I mean, I don't really know. I mean, if I rated it a 100, then it'd be like, oh man, you had no problems with it. But I don't have any problems with it that I can think of. I'll just give it a safe 90 for audience score, and then you will be the critic score.
Yeah, and out of everything that I can say about the movie, to sum it up in one sentence, I think that this story could have been developed a lot more interestingly and a lot more complicated, and could have had a lot more dynamicism coming from the guy that just came off of doing Oppenheimer, which is one of the most complicated, intense, interesting stories I've ever seen. This movie feels like a downgrade in storytelling, in like raw storytelling. It feels like an upgrade in everything else from a technical standpoint, which is why a lot of people are going to give it high reviews. For me, this movie lands much closer to like an 80 or a 79,
Wow.
Which is what I'll give it. I liked it quite a lot. I thought Matt Damon did a great job. Everyone else, every other character, I thought Anne Hathaway's character Penelope was very one-dimensional, mainly because we only saw one side of her. In the book, I feel like that character was a lot more interesting, but in the movie, she's kind of just like a sad person the entire time that doesn't really do anything. Same thing with Telemachus, Tom Holland's character. Not the exact same thing, but in a similar sense. It doesn't really feel like he did much. It feels like he went to one place and then came back, versus that character is a lot more interesting in the book. To me, every character is more interesting in the book, and Odysseus is the only one that really gets room to grow. But I feel like even then, like Calypso was a much more interesting character in the book. All of the gods were more interesting in the book. And I get that when you make an adaptation, you can't be 100% faithful. But, they shot for the stars in a technical sense and they hit it. But I feel like they didn't give that much energy and time and devotion to every other aspect besides, making sure that they could shoot it on IMAX. It feels much more like a demo reel for the technology than it actually feels like an engaging adaptation that is faithful to the source material in at least the interpersonal communications and the politics behind it. But that's just my consensus. Everyone has the right to their own opinion. I might be wrong to someone, I might be dead right. I don't really care. This is mainly just my personal opinion because that's all I can stake on. But I'm going to give it a slightly harsher 79% on the Andrew Heilman meter. Osh gives it a 90, or Washington gives it a 90. And yep, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you all later. Bye-bye.
Adios.
Thank you for listening to Both Sides. What movie do you want us to review next? Let me know and I'll credit you in your username. Like and follow if you enjoyed this podcast and to stay notified of future reviews. Remember, your right to your opinion matters. Peace out.